All right, this is the follow-up video here. So we're going up to Moose Lake. Moose Lake is 234 miles north of where I live. And we figured we'd take my wife's car. We're going to go up there. We rented we had a whole bunch of friends go up there. I think there were 12 cabins, and we took 8 of them. And went up there for a week. So I decided we'll take the wife's electric car because hers is a little bit bigger. It's a little more comfortable than this one. And we had to carry stuff. I mean, we had lawn chairs and fishing equipment and, you name it. We're there for the duration. And my wife packed enough clothing for 6 months. She doesn't understand that I wear the same shirt for 5 days. She thinks I'm supposed to change shirts 3 times a day or something. I don't know what she was thinking. But anyway, we had her packed to the gills. And I looked at my, charged it up to 100%, and I looked at our mileage, and it says we had about 260 miles. I said, hey, we're golden. We can drive all the way up there. But I thought, we should stop somewhere along the way and boost the charge up so that when we come home, we can only have to charge once. So the plan was I looked at my route planner and that, and it's surprising once you get up by Mille Lacs Lake and in that area, there's no charging stations. There's a lot of them south of there. I mean, thousands of them. But there was one in Grand Rapids, 2 of them. There was a Zeph Energy and a car dealership. And I thought, well, we'll stop there and I'll throw in, maybe about 20 or 30 kilowatts. And that'll get us, we only had to drive another 12 miles, get us to the cabin, and then when we leave, we can get all the way back to the Minneapolis area and, charge up enough to get home. So, no big deal. So we drive all the way up to Grand Rapids. I stop at the Zeph Energy unit. Of course, it didn't work. It was dead. They did have some level 2 chargers there, but the level 1s or level 3s didn't work at all. And that's typical Zeph Energy. I try to avoid them because they don't maintain anything. They don't really monitor their systems. The only way they know they don't work is you have to call them. And they make it really hard to find their phone number. I don't think they want you to call them. But anyway, so that was dead. So then I went to the car dealership. Well, it turns out the car dealership, even though it's public, I don't know, I think you have to go inside and tell them you're going to charge so they can authorize you. Because I went through all the stuff. I got my app going. You got to have the app, and plugged it in and everything. And I had to scan my phone, which worked just fine, except it says you're not authorized to charge. And I'm thinking, well, I got my credit card there. I got the money there. I mean, you got 3,000 doubloons and to use, but it didn't work. So I said, well, now what do we do? So we went back to the level 2s. I actually drove back and forth about 12 times. I used up 7 miles of energy. So we've charged up the extra 7 miles. And I said, this is nonsense. Let's get the hell out of here. So we went to the campground and or to the cabin. And I talked to the guy there and I said, say, I'm going to plug my car in because I did bring my level 1 charger along. I said, we're going to plug our car in and charge it for way home. And I said, I'm not, ripping you off. I said, I'm going to tell you about it, and you charge me extra for electricity. I want to be fair. And he says, oh, I don't care. That's fine. Just do what you got to do. And I said, okay, fine. So we did that. We plugged in, and it took about almost 3 days to charge it, which is fine. I mean, we were down to 10% energy, and we ran it all the way up to 100. So we had enough battery to get us all the way back to home with no problem. In fact, we got to the cabin and we had 37 miles of extra energy left. So it was much more efficient than we even planned. So anyway, it was kind of interesting. We did all this fishing and did all the fun stuff, and headed home on Saturday. And I went up to pay the bill. the guy was real good that way too. I was going to pay him right away, and he said, "Oh, just pay me when you're going to go and stuff." And okay, fine. And I paid him cash, and I said, I should pay you some extra for electricity. Well, no, he said, I did some research, and it sounds like it costs between $9 and $10 to charge your car all the way up. So I charge you an extra $10. Is that okay? And I said, I was going to pay you more than that, but that's fine. I said, I'm perfectly pleased with that. So he was smart enough to understand, that it costs, so little money. And he was pretty much right on the nose. It's like $9.50 at the rate, their kilowatt rate there. And it charged me $7. It was $7 for me to charge it at home, and $10 there. So $17 to drive 468 miles, I think we went. I dare anybody to beat that with a gas car. I mean, that was incredibly cheap. And we had the AC running, and it was awesome. So everything worked out just great. But, one of the other couples there said, well, this is why you can't have an electric car, because there's no place to charge. And I said, now listen, if I had an electric car up north like that'd be awesome, because here again, you charge at home. And I said, if you're going to drive anywhere of any distance, it's probably going to be to Minneapolis, where there's thousands of chargers. I said, the problem with up north is people up north are conservative. And so they don't have electric cars to speak of, because they're against things. And consequently, the utility companies don't put any effort in the infrastructure, because people up there aren't using it. Well, if more people use the infrastructure will advance and improve. I mean, one feeds the other. They go hand in hand, and foot and mouth, or whatever. So the story is, it was a success. It actually was a success. Everything worked out great. It was a little frustrating to be up there and have all these things not working, but it makes you think. Zephyr Energy is one that does not do this, but all the other ones, for the most part, do. When you look at the app, it tells you if they're working or not. It also tells you if they're in use or not. So you can target charging stations that are not in use but are functional. And this is the first time, really, I shouldn't say first time, second time I ran into a charger that didn't work, and they've both been Zephyr Energy. So if you haven't noticed, I'm not a big fan of that outfit. They don't maintain their stuff at all. They're kind of tied in with utility companies, because our town has Zephyr Energy. It didn't work. I tried it on 3 different EVs. It didn't work. I finally found a number to call. I called them, and they sent out a crew, and they fixed it. It's been working ever since. But that's what you got to do with them, which is great, but it doesn't help you any if you're stranded and you need it working now. So I kind of tried to avoid them. So lesson to be learned: if you run across a Zephyr Energy, you better make sure it works before you plan on a trip that's going to include them as your source. But all in all, pretty happy. It's been a year and a half now that we've been totally EV, and that was probably the most frustrating thing so far. And it was pretty non-frustrating when it comes right down to it, because it wasn't a big deal. We had 37 miles of range left, and we only had to drive 12 miles, so I certainly didn't have to charge. So it worked out. And the resort owner let us plug in, and that solved the problem there anyway. So all in all, worked out just fine. So for anybody who thinks you can't travel with an EV, you certainly can. And I would plan a trip to Florida. Of course, I don't think I ever want to go to Florida. California, I'd go. Been there a couple times. So California, Utah, whatever. Yeah, I take the car, and I do the charging. And one of the questions that came up was, well, how long would it take to charge it? And I said, well, look at it this way. Driving up north was 4.5 hours. We left at 10 o'clock in the morning. I said the plan really was to stop around noon and plug in and walk over to a restaurant and get something to eat. And I said that probably would have been enough to fill the tank, to say. If it was totally dead, you're probably looking at a little over an hour to go from 10% to 80%. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. You plan your breaks and your dinner and all that around charging. And, that's the only difference. It does take planning. You got to plan. You can't just blindly drive and think that, like with gas cars, that, there's always a gas station somewhere. But I've run into situations where there aren't gas stations. And we've actually had to have somebody go get us gas because we ran out. So it happens with both. I agree that maybe it's a little harder to carry a bucket of electrons, but you just plan. So good planning worked out just fine, and it was a success. So thumbs up there for the EV experience. So please do subscribe. Give me a like, will ya? Thanks very much.